Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Today, we're going to do something a little radical.
Uh-huh.
We're going to look at the information you see every day, science news, world events, and ask a pretty uncomfortable question.
Which is?
What if a lot of it isn't just biased or sloppy, but is actually a deliberate psychological operation, something designed to, well, steer your behavior?
And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We're moving past just, misinformation.
Yeah.
We're unpacking the actual structured professional methods used to engineer reality.
Right.
And most importantly, we're giving you the formula to spot it.
Okay, so to show you just how pervasive this is, let's start with a quick pop quiz. This is pulled right from our source material, so just think about these beliefs, things that were, for a long time, considered settled facts.
Right.
Are they true today? 1, eating eggs raises your cholesterol. 2, you have to drink 8 glasses of water every day.
The classic.
The classic. 3, milk builds strong bones. And number 4, clinical depressing is just a simple chemical imbalance in your brain.
And the shocking thing is that, none of those are really true, not based on current independent research. But here's the really critical part.
Go on.
These weren't just common mistakes. They were, in fact, incredibly effective, long-running psychological campaigns, or SGOPs, often backed by huge institutions or corporations that benefited from you changing your behavior.
So when you realize that huge narratives about our health, about our own psychology, are actually rooted in manipulation, it makes you wonder about everything else.
It has to. And that's why we're not just here to, complain about it. We're providing a structured tool.
Yeah.
It's called the NCI, the Narrative Credibility Index, Engineered Reality Scoring System.
And the whole point here isn't to make you a cynic about everything, right? It's to help you see the pattern that all of these successful SGOPs follow.
Exactly. Once you see that blueprint,
Yeah.
and it's the same one used by government propaganda, corporate marketing, social media, you start to gain a kind of immunity.
So let's start with where this playbook even comes from. When we say psychological operations or PSYOPS, that's not just a buzzword.
No, it's a formal military doctrine. It comes straight from the Army Officer's Manual.
And the mission of a PSYOP officer is extremely specific, isn't it?
It is entirely focused on behavior. The official mission is, and I'm quoting here, to influence the behavior of foreign target audiences to support U.S. national objectives.
Okay, so the key there is behavior. It's not about changing minds.
No, success is measured by the observable modification of that audience's behavior.
So it's not enough to get someone to just agree with you. You need them to physically do something, or, I guess, stop doing something.
Precisely. And the people they hire for this role, it tells you everything. The officer has to be a master of influence, a cross-cultural expert, and, proficient in social psychology, persuasion science.
The source material lists everything from marketing and advertising to international relations.
They're training the world's most effective behavior modification specialists.
But here's the fascinating part, the boundary. Military PSYOPS are for foreign audiences. But the creator of this NCI system, a guy named Chase Hughes, he trained Navy SEALs, the CIA, the FBI.
The people who run these operations.
Exactly. And now he's taken that same military playbook and applied it to what he calls engineered reality that's being run domestically.
And that is the whole pivot. The techniques that were developed for foreign battlefields are now being used by PR firms, by political campaigns, by social media algorithms right here at home. The playbook was outsourced.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics of this system. The NCI, you said it's a list of 20 questions, and you score each one from 1 to 5. What are the scores we need to look out for?
So the scoring gives you a pretty objective measure of intent. If you get a score from, say, 0 to 25, it's a low likelihood of escopiacy. You're probably just looking at normal bias or an honest mistake.
Okay.
But if you hit 76 to 100, you are seeing overwhelming professional signs of manipulation. That is your red flag zone.
But the part that really jumped out at me was that middle ground, the 40 to 70 range. You called that the dangerous zone.
It's the most challenging to process. A score like that, between 40 and 70, usually means there's a kernel of truth at the center of it. The event might be real, a crisis, a health issue, but the way the story is packaged and delivered,
It's designed to do something else.
it's designed to divide or distract or make someone a lot of money.
But hold on, isn't all communication, especially political communication, driven by an agenda? Where's the line between just, strategic PR and a malicious SCOP?
That is the exact line the NCI system helps you draw. Strategic PR wants to make its point look good. A SCOP, an engineered reality, is designed to make you abandon your critical thinking and just adopt a behavior. It's the intentional triggers that push that score over 40.
And the creator's take on that 40/70 score is?
It's never to help you.
Let's break down some of the 20 elements on that checklist. What are some of the big patterns we can start to spot?
Okay, we can group them. Let's start with the one that's a dead giveaway for orchestration. Timing.
Timing.
You have to ask yourself, does this story land at the exact moment a powerful group, a party, a corporation needs support or, a distraction? If the timing is just a little too perfect, it scores high.
Then you have the emotional lever.
Yes, emotional manipulation. The checklist looks for things that provoke intense feelings, like fear or outrage, especially when there's no solid evidence behind it. The source material points out that images of, crying children or dead babies, that's psychological dynamite.
An automatic 5 out of 5 on the score.
Instantly. And the third one, which I think is maybe the most corrosive, is tribal division.
Us versus them.
A classic. If the story can be boiled down to a simple us versus them, pitting one group against another, it's a huge sign that the goal is to stop people from thinking critically together.
And of course you have to follow the money.
That's financial gain. Do powerful groups or individuals stand to benefit, disproportionately if everyone accepts this story? If it leads to a law or a product that makes a few people billions, that's a high score.
So we have those, but what are some of the other key elements, the more subtle ones?
Two really important ones are cherry-picked data and suppression of dissent.
Okay.
Cherry-picked data is using stats that are technically true, but are yanked completely out of context. And suppression of dissent is, it's an organized campaign to shut down other views, not by debating them, but by just delegitimizing the speaker.
And we saw that suppression tactic so clearly in the first big political case study you found. The Gulf War and the Naira testimony.
Oh, this is the blueprint. Absolutely. It's 1990, the run-up to the Gulf War, and the Bush administration needs public support for an invasion.
Right.
So in October, a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl named Naira testifies before Congress. She tearfully claims she saw Iraqi soldiers taking babies out of incubators and leaving them on the floor to die.
I remember seeing that. It was broadcast everywhere. It absolutely convinced people that intervention was a moral duty.
And when the NCI system analyzes this case, it scores an 88 out of 100. It gets a 5 out of 5 on timing. Perfect for the political goal. 5 out of 5 on emotional dead babies. And a 5 out of 5 on uniform messaging, because every major news outlet repeated the story identically, without question.
And years later, it came out that Naira was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador.
And the entire story was a complete fabrication created by the PR firm Hill and Knowlton.
The cost of that one lie: hundreds of American lives, 30,000 Iraqis killed, and trillions of dollars. And your point is that once that firm saw how well this worked,
they realized that Playbook was marketable to anyone with a billion-dollar problem.
Which brings us right to the tobacco industry.
A textbook corporate SEOP. It's 1953. Tobacco execs have internal science proving cigarettes cause cancer. Their entire business model is on the line. So what do?
They hire Hill and Knowlton.
The very same firm. And the PR guy, John Hill, he had this brilliant, cynical insight. He realized they didn't need to prove cigarettes were safe. They just needed to create enough confusion that nobody could prove they were dangerous.
So the goal was just intellectual gridlock.
Exactly. They created something called the Tobacco Industry Research Committee. Sounds official, right?
Sure does.
Its only job was to fund counter-research and flood the media with conflicting studies. An internal memo from Brown and Williamson later admitted it. Doubt is our product.
They weaponized uncertainty. How does the NCI score that?
An 82 out of 100. It got a 5 out of 5 for cherry-picked data, a 5 for authority overload, hiring scientists with great credentials to go out and muddy the waters, and a consistent 5 for suppression of dissent. They ruined the careers of doctors who spoke out. And they kept that lie going for 40 years.
It's just wild to think that so many things I learned about health growing up were just corporate PSYOPS dressed up as science.
And the pattern is everywhere. The fossil fuel industry casting doubt on climate change, the sugar industry blaming fat while pumping products full of sugar, and of course pharmaceutical companies. The claim that OxyContin wasn't addictive, it's the same model.
And then this whole model went from newspapers and TV right into everyone's pocket. SKOPS went digital.
And social media added algorithmic optimization, which turned manipulation into a literal profit stream.
The case of the Ethiopian civil war in 2021 is just tragic.
It's horrifying. An elderly chemistry professor, Mayor Amar, was targeted on Facebook. They posted his photo, called him a traitor, and published his home address.
And his son tried to get Facebook to take it down.
Repeatedly. But product managers at Facebook have since testified that the algorithm actually promoted that kind of hate speech.
Why on earth would it do that?
Because anger and outrage generate massive engagement, and massive engagement generates ad revenue. The financial gain was literally coded into the system.
What was the NCI score on that one?
A 78 out of 100. High scores on emotional manipulation, on missing information, and of course financial gain, where the platform itself profited. 3 weeks after that post, Professor Amar was executed. It took Facebook 8 more days to take the post down.
Now we have to talk about the most complicated version of this, information warfare, where both sides are scoring high on the checklist.
This is the very definition of modern division, and the perfect example is the debate over the origins of COVID-19 back in 2020. Was it natural or was it a lab leak?
Okay, let's start with the natural origin side.
That campaign really kicked off with a Lancet letter. It was signed by 27 prominent scientists, and it basically called anyone discussing a lab leak a conspiracy theorist. When you run that campaign through the NCI system, it scores a 70 out of 100.
So a high-end SCOP score, what drove it so high?
Suppression of dissent and authority overload. They used the absolute authority of 27 scientists and figures like Dr. Fauci to just shut down the conversation.
Yeah.
But there was also critical missing information.
Which was?
The letter's organizer, Peter Daszak, didn't disclose his massive conflict of interest. His organization had funded research at the Wuhan lab. The narrative was designed to protect institutions.
But at the same time, the lab leak campaign, which was pushed by a lot of politicians, it also scored high, didn't it? Around 66.
It did. That campaign scored very high on tribal division, making a scientific question an immediate political battle. It also scored high on authority overload, with politicians claiming it was settled science before any real investigation happened.
So if both narratives score high, what does the system even tell you? It's not telling you what's true.
It's telling you that the information around the truth is being weaponized. 2 high scores mean you never actually get an honest debate, you just get information warfare. And that division, which is fueled by anger for clicks, is intentional. It's meant to exhaust you, so you stop asking the unifying questions that might challenge the powerful.
Let's test this pattern on something very current, very ambiguous. UFO disclosure. Specifically, whistleblowers like this Jake Barber in 2025.
Right. So if we run the NCI system, not on whether aliens are real, but on the delivery of the Jake Barber story, the timing, the packaging, it scores a 63 out of 100.
Okay, so that's a strong likelihood of an orchestrated narrative. What pushes it into that range?
Again, timing is a 5 out of 5. The story broke right when these drone sightings were all over the news and just before a big inauguration. And financial gain is also a 5 out of 5. Barber immediately formed a company. Skywatchers LLC, there's a book deal.
So a high score here doesn't mean aliens aren't real.
No,
Yeah.
it just means the information is being heavily managed for an agenda. The orchestration could be real disclosure being carefully packaged, or
That's it.
it could be a massive cover story to make those real classified aircraft tests, the drone sightings, just disappear under a much more interesting headline.
So we're just surrounded by this orchestrated division, this paralysis. What's the ultimate result of all of this?
Division is the tool, but paralysis is the end goal. I mean, when the algorithm keeps you enraged at your neighbor over politics, something engineered purely for financial gain, you stop looking up. You stop watching powerful institutions. You stop asking the real unifying questions.
The questions that cut across those manufactured lines.
Precisely. Think about those 2 neighbors, the conservative and the liberal. They might fight all day about policy, but they both share a deep, uniting curiosity. They both want to know the truth about UFOs. They both want to know the unvarnished truth about COVID's origins.
They both want to know what really happened to Jeffrey Epstein.
Exactly. That shared pursuit of truth that hasn't been manipulated, that is what unites us.
So we've given you the NCI system. This is the tool, the checklist, to identify these patterns in the news, in corporate ads, in your social media feed. This is your countermeasure.
And the starting point for most people when they discover this is to ask, who is pulling the strings? But given how prevalent these systems are, the deeper question, the one for you to really think about is this: why do we keep handing them over?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.